As a permanent, tangible reminder of the Allied victory in World War II, a special medal was distributed to schoolchildren. A timely and impressive gesture to link the youth of Australia with the widespread spirit of joyous relief after 6 years of war. A release of emotions expressed exuberantly and simultaneously in a series of victory parades in all states. Our first Field Marshal, Sir Thomas Blamey, led the parade through Melbourne. VE Day and VJ Day had been celebrated by those at home, while many thousands of servicemen and women were still abroad. But this was an occasion for a great reunion, with the nation's young as proud of their victory medals as their elders were of their ribbons and decorations. Tokens of triumph on this gay 10th of June back in 1946. U.S. Memorial Day, and in Ipswich, Queensland, 3,000 people paid homage to the 1,500 American dead buried there. Miniature stars and stripes and poppy wreaths were laid on the graves. Their crosses, a bond of everlasting friendship. Also in Australia were more than 25,000 German, Italian and Japanese prisoners of war awaiting repatriation. The Japanese, 5,637 of them, were the first to go. All but a handful traveling in 2 of their own merchant ships, escorted aboard under Army guards and about to experience the cattle boat conditions which had been the lot of so many more Australians a few years before. 9 inscrutable officers branded as war criminals and brought from Rabaul ignore the cameras as they strive to maintain face while waiting to be flown by flying boat to Singapore for trial. On the domestic front, rehabilitation. With the gradual lifting of petrol restrictions, road traffic rapidly increased and soon loomed the problem of parking. New South Wales Police Commissioner Mackay came up with a novel scheme to ease the pressure on his men. Disabled servicemen as special parking police. The strict physical requirements of the police force were relaxed, and artificial limbs were no bar this time to enlistment. And while awaiting the issue of another uniform, the recruits were taught the technique of chalk, book and pencil. It was the birth of the Brown Bomber. To the aid of legless servicemen came Queenslander Bert Tate with this novel gadget, the product of 9 months' experiment. Attached to the steering column of a car, it enabled the driver to control the clutch, foot brake and accelerator by hand. Tate demonstrates his invention. A push on the button and the clutch works. He turns the control and the brakes work as well. The control is instantaneous, bringing safe driving within arm's reach of the legless. But for the homeless, there was little help. Old homes marked for demolition were quickly seized by self-styled squatters. Council authorities deplored the act, which they termed as jungle law. But to the squatters, it was 9 points of possession, and despite the discomforts, a roof over their heads. 1946 saw the restrictions on buildings lifted, but construction of new homes was lagging. Bricks were scarce, and builders had to depend on oldies from demolitions. As demobilization continued, the capacity of the building industry, with the lack of skilled tradesmen, was stretched to the limit. Ancient disused chimney stacks suddenly became important sources of supply and were skillfully toppled. What's that? We have too many? Okay, stack 'em up again. Suspended long before the start of World War II, work on Sydney's Circular Quay Railway was resumed. This was the scene in 1946. Today, unrecognizable as road traffic speeds across the 2-level Cairll Expressway, easing the ever-increasing pressure on the narrow thoroughfares of the city proper. And it was at Circular Quay that the first commander of the British Commonwealth Occupation Force in Japan, Lieutenant General Sir John Northcott, arrives in the official state launch Lady Hopeton, to be welcomed as the first Australian-born of the 27 New South Wales governors since 1788.
We are looking forward with great pleasure to living here amongst you and helping you, if we may, and where we can, in everything that pertains to the welfare of this community.
Heavy rain didn't dampen the enthusiasm of crowds thronging the route to St. Mary's Cathedral to welcome home from Rome another famous son, Cardinal Gilroy, first Australian to be elevated to the Sacred College of Cardinals.
If we Australians of today, like those who framed our Constitution, humbly rely on the blessing of Almighty God and individually strive for the welfare of our country, then we may be sure that we shall at the same time promote our own and our neighbours' happiness and the welfare of our nation.
It was certainly a year of firsts. Robert Butler, the first United States ambassador to Australia, arrived from New York with his wife and family to be welcomed by Dr. Evatt, Minister for External Affairs. The appointment made Mr. Butler the senior member of the Diplomatic Corps in Canberra. At Government House, as guests of the Governor-General, the Duke of Gloucester, the Supreme Allied Commander in Southeast Asia, Lord Louis Mountbatten and Lady Mountbatten. Supremo, as he was known to servicemen, had last visited Australia with the Prince of Wales in 1920. Here he is with Prince William. Lady Mountbatten, in the uniform of Commander-in-Chief of St. John's Ambulance, met ladies of the Australian press, while her husband talked with cabinet ministers, led by Prime Minister Ben Chifley. The Duke and Duchess of Gloucester made the first royal visit to Norfolk Island. At this picturesque and rugged outpost 900 miles from Sydney, they were welcomed by leading citizens, many of whom were descendants of the Bounty mutineers. The Duchess, gay in a garden party frock, and the Duke enjoy the uninhibited hospitality of these island folk. A rink on the road. The younger brigade of Adelaide prepare for a weekend skating hike through the hills, making their own fun in 46. No splinters on this floor. After a stiff climb, they make up time crocodiling downhill. This was known as apple carting, without an upset. Wheels over wheels, or mechanical leapfrog, South Australian style. Australian film star Ann Richards flew back from Hollywood to tell us about the stars.
A great many people have asked me if I would tell them something about some of the personalities that I've met and that I've worked with since I've been in Hollywood. And they've always put Mr. Brian Donlevy and Clark Gable and Joseph Cotten and a number of others on the top. And I would like to tell you that I know Mr. Gable, and I've worked with Joseph Cotten and also with Brian Donlevy and Randolph Scott, and they look very much, in fact, they look exactly the same as they do on the screen, and they're very charming people and very interesting people.
American playwright Oscar Hammerstein of South Pacific and Sound of Music fame paid us a brief visit.
Well, I've come here mainly to take a look at the theatrical situation and see what's doing and tell them what I have for them. I have some plays that have been done in the United States with great success. Of course, it's more than that. It's a homecoming for Mrs. Hammerstein, this trip. You know, she's an Australian girl. And it's my second visit, and I have very lovely memories of the first visit.
I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles, a popular song of the day. So science graduate Arthur McCarthy conceived the idea of producing sturdy, long-life spheres with just a metal ring and a mixture of oil and soap. A breath-saving scheme. a new form of inflation, and a craze which spread round the world. But in the peaceful Anatoki River in New Zealand, these were genuine bubbles, made by tame eels, personal friends of Miss Margaret McCallum. She snaps her fingers underwater to attract their attention, and out come the usually shy and elusive creatures at her bidding. They seek that personal touch, and their favorite menu, raw meat and blancmange. Funny fishes, Ills. Back in Australia, police dog trainer Scotty Denham achieved for a bet what many considered impossible. Training a dingo, the marauder of the outback, symbol of cowardice and treachery. These pups were introduced to poultry in the hope that familiarity would breed contempt. But the bird takes no chances when the chase gets hot. An interesting experiment with outlaws that have never been domesticated. Even walking the plank didn't scare this chap. The unique pupil of an outstanding teacher. The first dingo ever to do anything good. Rarely a week passed without that amazing personality, Jack Davy, providing newsreel audiences with a chuckle. This time, the cameras caught him in a tough spot, pitting his skill against the patience and paws of a pal. A somewhat unusual scene which was bound to arouse the curiosity of this passing parade.
You got me, brother?
My, what a clever dog.
Oh, he's not that clever. We played 5 games this morning, and that's the first one he's won.
At Oaklands in Victoria, members of the local hunt club gathered for the first meet since the war. Literally, the club was starting again from scratch. Many were making their first run. Horses, dogs, and riders. You didn't have to wear a pink coat to participate. Every fence was a test. Some crashed in flight. Others just didn't make off. Bumps and bruises were part of the fun as an old English custom was revived in an Australian bushland setting. Way back in 1867 in South Australia, imported English hunting greyhounds took part in the first coursing meeting on record, with wallabies as lures. By 1946, the sport was flourishing, a medium for big betting on rich cup events. But opposition developed as hares succumbed to the speed and snapping jaws of their pursuers. Points were awarded for the first dog to reach the hare, but acrobatic agility of the hare often outfoxed the dog, as happened here. Watch this sensational near kill as the camera stops the action. And this hare survived to run at least one more race in a sport that was later banned in some states. It was long odds on at Randwick for the Warwick Stakes as Apple Mully mounts the glamour horse of the day, Burnborough, back from a spell to attempt his 11th successive win. As the field of 6 comes down to the ledger, Magnificent is in front, but Burnborough is emerging from a pocket on the rails ahead of Abbeville. Big Bay had plenty in reserve, and Mully relaxed him to a canter on the post to beat Magnificent, a galloper worthy of his name, but outclassed in every stride by Burnborough. Jockey Mully's overconfident riding at the finish earned him a reprimand from the stewards. In Brisbane, it was a similar triumphant story in both the Doomben 10,000 and the Doomben Cup. Here, with strides reputed to be longer than those of the mighty Farlap, Burnborough on the outside mows down the 10,000 field to register his 26th win in 37 starts. Despite this magnificent performance, a few weeks later, Burnborough broke down in the LKS McKinnon Stakes in Victoria, and the £25,000 stake-winning career was over. The mighty Burnborough ended his days on a Kentucky stud, a gallant star of the Australian turf in 1946. To retrieve the Davis Cup, won in 1939 for the first time by Australia, came an American team of 5. Jack Kramer and Ted Schroeder, Gardner Malloy, Bill Talbot, and the erratic Parker as captain. The Australian squad to defend the famous trophy was groomed by Jack Crawford, first Australian to win the Wimbledon singles in 1933. Jack put his crew through a strenuous preparation. Billy Sidwell strains back. John Bromwich relaxes. But for all this, Kramer and Schroeder won all 5 rubbers, and the famous trophy went back to Forest Hills, where it stayed until 1949. In Sydney, veteran walker Athol Stubbs defended his state 10,000 metres title against a mediocre field. Stubbs, who had hit the top in Australia just before the war, was still too good. No, he's not running. See how his heel hits the ground first? And Athol's double-jointed hips certainly gave him an advantage. He lapped some of his opponents 4 times. Athol Stubbs, holder of every Australian title from 1 to 5 miles, who was deprived by war from seeking Olympic honours. More than 42,000 spectators crammed Adelaide Oval for the annual Australian rules battle between Victoria and South Australia, the 18-a-side game played only in Australia. A tough, non-stop sport which calls for the highest skill in handling, kicking and teamwork. And for the benefit of those followers of other codes, there's no tackling of the type relished by rugby fans, and no offside. You either kick it or punch it away, and if the ball passes through the 2 inner posts, it's 6 points. On this occasion, Victoria ran out the winners by 117 points to 80. 1946, the MCC team was back to resume the test battles. Former English captain Arthur Gilligan was here to describe the rise of new stars, and all eyes were on the young Queenslander, Colin McCool. To the delight of a Melbourne crowd, he tied Hammond in knots. The famous all-rounder was bamboozled. Imagine a slow spinner bowling a maiden to Hammond. And what's more, he later dismissed him in both innings in the second test. Colin McCool. At Sydney, during the second test, England were all out for 255, and Australia had lost 4 for 230 on the second day when the rains came. Play resumed on a damaged wicket, but Sid Barnes was still there, and despite the efforts of the English bowlers, he and Don Bradman set about rewriting the record book. Barnes notched his first test century and crawled past the 200 mark after 9.5 hours, before his marathon dig ended at 234, the slowest double century in test history, breaking Sid Gregory's highest score by an Australian in a Sydney test, 201 established in 1894. England spinner Douglas Wright strove in vain to break the Barnes-Bradman 5th wicket partnership of 405, which set a new high for any wicket in tests in Australia. The Don also reached 234, his 8th double century in tests and his 36th in first-class cricket. Now, after Mo, while we watch the one and only Mo, Roy Reen, master of mime and specialist in splutter, as he plays the role of the third man in the ring at a charity boxing show for the Police Citizens Boys Clubs. For once, the referee was popular, even if he did break the rules himself. Moquis of Queensbury rules, of course. The famous vaudevillian warms up to give a perfect example of one-eyed refereeing. Strike me lucky. And he did, poor chap. He's been hit with everything by both opponents. It's all over, but here comes a king-size haymaker that sends the winner down to the boards. Boards made from trees like these in a West Australian forest. Hardwood giants, many close to 300 feet high. But in 1946, timber-getting techniques were still primitive. But even the tallest were vulnerable to axe blows, as a scarp is cut to guide the fall, and then a one-man saw, kept on a line by elastic guide ropes, completes the job. This, believe it or not, was a fire on the New South Wales coalfields caused by rain. A subsidence of soaked farmlands above a shallow sealed-off section of Cessnock No. 2 colliery let in air, and combustion did the rest. Craters and fissures spread over 5 acres. The district was blanketed in a pall of dense, acrid smoke. A fire started by water. Major post-war problem in Britain, as in most other parts of Europe, was the shortage of food. Australia answered the call, and returning British warships were packed with the products of our pastures, which had escaped the ravages of war. Urgent relief from a 6-year rationing scale, the severity of which few Australians could comprehend. But comparisons illustrate just how tight English belts were buckled. During those years, £46 million worth of Australian wool was exported only to England, as were the clips of South Africa and New Zealand. It was not until September of 1946 that public auctions were resumed, and the Wool Realisation Committee set about clearing an unprecedented 7 million bale stockpile, a task which was to take 5 years and earn more than £90 million for Australian growers. It was an exciting scene at Sydney's Royal Exchange, a babble of bids, rising a farthing at a time to record heights, intelligible only to the experts, as eager buyers sought to catch the auctioneer's eye or ear.
22 pence. 23 pence. 23.
Values zoomed. The fixed price of 15 pence per pound was tripled at the first sale, and within days the precious fleece was bound for hungry mills and looms on the other side of the world. It was well we carried such a stockpile, for widespread drought was taking terrible toll of flocks. Even hand feeding could not prevent huge losses. Thousands of ewes, weakened by starvation and thirst, died during lambing, leaving their offspring with little chance of survival. Wandering waifs in the parched paddocks of the outback. A grim reminder of the unpredictable whims of Mother Nature at the close of 1946. A year to remember.